on August 12, 1985. Japan Airlines Flight 123 was preparing for a routine trip. It was a domestic flight, Haneda to Osaka, a popular route during the Obon holiday season. The aircraft was a Boeing 747 SR, the short-range jumbo variant. Registration J8119. A massive plane built for busy domestic routes, nearly full for the holiday. Families and business travelers filled its seats. Captain Masami Takahama, an experienced 747 pilot, was in command. 12 flight attendants and a professional crew prepared for an uneventful flight. Weather was clear. The plane pushed back and took off on schedule at 1812. For the first minutes, everything seemed perfectly normal. Passengers settled for a short sub-hour flight. Seatbelt signs were turned off and the crew began service. But that routine portrait of travel would soon be shattered. Flight designated JAL 123. It departed Haneda at 6:12 p.m. local time. Below, the lights of Tokyo receded as the jet climbed a cruise. Everything seemed ordinary. No one could foresee what came next. This was the beginning of a tragic timeline. Just 12 minutes into the flight, disaster struck. It happened suddenly and without warning. At 1824, climbing through 24,000 feet over Sagami Bay, a loud bang echoed through the aircraft. A catastrophic sound, an explosive rupture of the fuselage. Cabin pressure was lost and oxygen masks deployed automatically. A white fog filled the cabin. Panic and confusion followed. In the flight deck, the crew recognized a major emergency. The source, the rear pressure bulkhead. A dome-shaped wall at the back of the cabin. That bulkhead had ruptured violently. The explosion blew off a large portion of the vertical tail fin, and it severed all 4 hydraulic lines, the plane's control lifelines. Elevators, rudder, and ailerons became unresponsive. Essential control surfaces were disabled. The pilots faced a crippled giant with almost no conventional control. Captain Takahama, First Officer Yutaka Sasaki, and Flight Engineer Hiroshi Fukuda fought to regain control. The plane began to pitch and yaw erratically, entering violent oscillations. This motion, a phugoid cycle, would repeatedly climb, then plunge. Passengers gripped armrests in terror as the flight turned into a roller coaster. In the cockpit, the crew declared an emergency and called Tokyo ATC. They reported loss of pressure and control problems. The fight had begun. The 32 minutes that followed were a testament to the crew's bravery. They faced an almost unmanageable aircraft with no rulebook for this failure. The 747 swung in sickening arcs, climbing, slowing, then diving. Airspeed would fall toward stall, then the jet would plunge again. Pilots flipped through manuals. There was no procedure for total hydraulic loss. They discovered they could influence the aircraft with differential engine thrust. By increasing thrust on one side and reducing it on the other, they could nudge the jet. This technique allowed limited steering, but required constant, tiny adjustments. Inside, the rapid decompression and shaking threw people and objects about. Flight attendants moved through the cabin, helping and reassuring passengers. Some passengers wrote farewell notes. Desperate, heartbreaking messages recovered later. These notes, later recovered, speak to the human cost of those minutes. The crew tried to steer back to Haneda and considered diverting to Yokota, but the jet drifted westward into mountainous terrain and would not cooperate. Controllers tracked the erratic blip and offered vectors and options. Their guidance was limited. The crew had to fight alone in the sky. For 32 minutes, they kept the plane aloft against overwhelming odds. Their skill and determination kept hundreds alive for longer than anyone expected. Yet the missing vertical stabilizer left the aircraft inherently unstable. Dutch rolls and yaw roll coupling fatigued the crew and airframe alike. The cockpit voice recorder captured the crew's desperate, disciplined work. The recording reveals immense stress and professional teamwork. Captain Takahama remained focused, giving calm, direct orders. First Officer Sasaki and Flight Engineer Fukuda executed his commands precisely. Commands to raise the nose and power echo on the tape. They used engine power to try to lift the nose during dives. The 3 men worked as a single unit, hands, eyes, and instincts aligned. They tried every possible measure, checklists, gear extension, throttle modulation. Lowering the landing gear added drag and helped stabilize the jet slightly. It was an improvised tactic born of necessity. Damage made radio communications intermittent, complicating coordination. Despite this, they conveyed urgency. JAL 123, uncontrolled. Controllers suggested alternates like Nagoya, but the jet would not readily turn as required. The yoke had minimal effect. Steering was agonizingly slow. Pilots had to anticipate the plane's motions and counter them with thrust. For brief moments, they held a semblance of stability. Small victories amid crisis. Those minutes took a physical and mental toll. Sweat, strain, unrelenting focus. Constant, precise throttle inputs were required to keep the jet flying. They tried to guide the aircraft toward flatter terrain, hoping for a survivable landing. Despite heroic effort, the damage set an unavoidable limit. As darkness fell, desperation in the cockpit increased. Warning lights and alarms punctuated the final minutes. The aircraft was losing altitude steadily over rugged terrain. The mountain ridges were growing closer with each passing second. Ground proximity warnings blared, "Pull up! Pull up!" Pilots commanded full power and attempted to climb. For a moment, the nose rose. It seemed possible they might clear the ridge, but the aircraft's response was weak and sluggish. The right wing clipped a line of trees on the ridge. That impact threw the jet into an uncontrollable roll. It flipped onto its back and entered a final fatal plunge. The cockpit voice recorder captured the last desperate seconds. At 18:56, 32 minutes after the rupture, Flight 123 struck Mount Takamagahara. The impact was catastrophic. The airframe disintegrated on the mountainside. Wreckage and burning fuel scattered across a remote slope. Most of the aircraft was destroyed by impact and fire. Of 524 people aboard, 520 were killed, one of aviation's worst tragedies. The scale of loss left families and a nation in mourning. 4 people miraculously survived, all seated in a rear section that stayed relatively intact. They were pulled clear of the main wreckage and airlifted to hospitals. Search efforts began almost immediately, but locating the site was difficult. Darkness and rugged terrain complicated the response. A USC 131st spotted fires on the mountainside about 20 minutes after impact. They radioed coordinates and offered help, but were told to stand down. Japanese authorities deployed JSDF helicopters, a decision later deemed controversial. Delays and confusion about jurisdiction and coordinates would matter profoundly. Teams struggled across steep, treacherous slopes in darkness and cold. Conflicting coordinates and poor visibility slowed ground access. One survivor later recalled hearing cries for help fade through the long night. Rescuers reached the site at dawn, nearly 14 hours after the crash. They found utter devastation, a wide debris field across the slope. Recovery teams faced an immense, emotionally draining task. The 4 survivors were located amid wreckage and taken to safety. One survivor had been thrown clear and found conscious in tree branches. Medevac helicopters rushed the injured to hospitals. Thousands of police, firefighters, and soldiers worked for weeks in difficult terrain. Personal belongings and farewell notes were recovered and returned to families. Crucially, the cockpit voice and flight data recorders were recovered for analysis. Investigators began painstaking work to understand the cause. Those devices held the key to the timeline and the failure mechanics. The Japanese Aircraft Accident Investigation Commission led a full, thorough inquiry. Analysis of wreckage and recorders revealed a shocking truth: a faulty repair. 7 years earlier, the same aircraft had suffered a tail strike that damaged the rear bulkhead. Boeing performed a repair, but it was not done correctly. Standard procedure required 2 rows of rivets, but in some sections, only 1 row was installed. That single row repair reduced strength and allowed fatigue cracks to grow over thousands of pressurization cycles. On August 12, 1985, the weakened bulkhead finally failed, causing explosive decompression. That failure set the chain of events that doomed the flight. The findings triggered major industry changes, inspections, and new directives worldwide. Boeing accepted responsibility and overhauled repair and quality control procedures. The accident exposed weaknesses in fail-safe design. Losing all hydraulic systems from one event was not fully anticipated. Regulators issued directives to inspect 747 bulkheads and review repair records. The legacy is corporate failure, flawed repair, and the consequences of lapses in oversight. It is also extraordinary heroism and heartbreaking human loss remembered in notes and memorials. Those lessons became a catalyst for change, new inspections, procedures, and better oversight. Over time, these reforms have made commercial air travel safer for everyone. The crash remains a solemn reminder of the critical importance of maintenance diligence. Careful inspections and adherence to procedures protect lives. We remember the victims, the bravery of the crew, and the lessons forged in tragedy. Flight 123 changed aviation forever, a painful, necessary lesson for safety.